from elsewhere. So that's the term we use for that is nesina lechatchila, like an initial placement. An initial placement on Shabbos is typically not mutter, meaning to put it lo miboy. Not only is it not mutter to make an initial placement directly onto an open fire, because that you can even do chazara onto an open fire, but even onto a covered fire, you can't take something from the refrigerator, even if it's fully cooked and it's dry. You cannot take that and put it onto the blech on Shabbos. That's what we call nesina lechatchila. The only heter is, as we said, if you meet l'tznai chazara. But to do it this way is not mutter. So what is mutter? What ways, what options are there of heating something up which is coming from the refrigerator, fully cooked and dry, but coming from the refrigerator? So one option is to put it on top of a kedera, meaning the best case being that you have a kedera of food, a pot of food. You have a pot of chalm, for example, which is on a blech or a crock pot, and that's hot, and so you're allowed to take this other food and put it on top of that, because that is considered to be a major shinui in cooking. People don't cook food on top of other pots. When they cook food on a fire or even a covered fire is already a shinui, right? That's why a blech works for chazara. It's already a shinui, but this is a much more major, much more significant shinui. To cook something on top or reheat something on top of another pot, that's something that's very unusual that you could do during the week. So that you're allowed to do even if as I said, even if the food's coming from the refrigerator. You don't have to meet the t'nai chazara. Just has to be the food is fully cooked and that the food is dry, so that you're not over any isser of bishul. But there's no problem of putting it there in order to reheat it, or to reheat it. Yes. So that's the best possibility when the pot has food in it. What about an empty pot? Meaning to say, can you simply take a pot? Let's say you don't have a pot of chalk. You have a fire, and maybe you have a covered fire, or even an uncovered fire, whatever. You have a fire, and you want to be able to heat something up. So you say, okay, I don't have any pot there now, but I'll take a pot. I'll take an empty pot, and I'll put it over the fire. I'll put it upside down so it doesn't burn. But I'll put the empty pot over the fire and put my food on top of that. Is that okay? See what it says in the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Reish and Gimel, Siv Gimel. Siv Gimel says, Hamashke baboker, a person who wakes up early Shabbos morning, and he sees that his food is already, his chant is already beginning to burn. He's afraid it's going to burn more by the time they're ready to eat. It's going to be more burn. Yachal lahasir, he can remove it from the stovetop. Ulahaniach kedera yeshana rekanis al pi hakira, and put an empty pot. It says put an empty pot on the kira. And then put this food back onto that empty pot. That's what it says. It says you can take the food off of the stovetop, put down an empty pot, and put the food back on this empty pot. And we're talking about, again, the food is fully cooked. It could be dry, or it doesn't have to be dry. It could be a regular tafshil that has liquid, but it's still hot. So there's no issue of bishul. The only issue is chazara. So this is mutter to put it on an empty pot. Now, which means to say the fire is not necessarily covered. It could be that his tafshil till now was sitting on an uncovered flame, because we learned that as long as according to the Ramah, even if the food was just Meichel ben Drusai when Shabbos began, it could be on an uncovered flame. But even according to the Mechaber, if it was completely cooked, and mitzvah viralo, or if it was completely raw when Shabbos started, and now you could have left it on an open flame, an uncovered flame. And now it's hours later, it went through the whole night, it's completely cooked, so there's no problem of bishul anymore with this tafshil. So this tafshil you could take off, and then put over the flame an empty pot, and put food on top of it. That's what it says in Sif Gimel. In Sif Hey, when the Shulchan Aruch is discussing warming up food, it says there, Mutala says al pi kederes chamne b'Shabbos tavshil shnesval shmeir Shabbos kol tzarcho. Here, it doesn't say just to take it off the flame. In Sif Gimel, it said we're talking about there was something was on the flame, and you're just replacing it. Sif Hey, it sounds like you're taking something a panadish. A panadish is like a knish type of food. Doesn't say it was on the flame. Sounds like you're allowed to put it there on top of a pot, even if it's not coming from the flame, even if it's coming from the refrigerator or whatever it may be. So the Achronim address this seeming inconsistency, and the teretz which the Pri Megadim says, which the Bir Halacha goes with, is that in Sif Gimel, where it's coming from the fire, so it's really a form of chazara, although the fire might not be covered, so you don't, but it's a form of a chazara, so you're allowed to put it even on an empty pot. You're allowed to take an empty pot and put it on top of that empty pot. Even if there's an uncovered fire and just put an empty pot over that fire, you're allowed to put this food back onto that empty pot. Whereas in Sif Hey, you're taking food that was not on the fire. It's fully cooked, but it was not on the fire. And you're initiating its presence, its placement over the fire. You're initiating on Shabbos, so that's only mutter if it's on a pot that has food in it. That cannot be put on an empty pot. Food coming from the refrigerator or in the case of wherever, coming from your kitchen table, cannot be placed over an empty, an open fire, even if it's covered by a pot. If it's an empty pot, it can only be placed on a pot. You have a pot of cholent anyway. You have a pot of cholent cooking, then you can put it on top of the pot of cholent. So, okay, that's the difference between Sif Gimel and Sif Hey. So that's why Sif Hey, the reason why you're allowed to take it even from the kitchen table or from the refrigerator, because you're putting onto a pot that's already sitting on the flame. And whereas Sif Gimel, you're taking an empty pot, it's not sitting on the flame, it's empty, there's no food in it. You're just putting it there now in order to be able to replace your food on top of it that it shouldn't burn, so that you're putting it on an empty pot is only mutter because it's coming from the Eish. And the way, just very brilliant, the Chazon Ish is masber. What's the difference whether you put it on an empty pot or you put it on a pot with food? Aren't they both a big shinui? Right? It's not normal way of cooking on top of a pot, even whether it's empty or not. So why is it only if the pot has food in it are you allowed to take other food from the kitchen or from the refrigerator and put it on? So the Chazon Ish is masber that when you have a pot on the flame and you put food on top of it, where is the food on top? Where is it getting its heat from? How is it getting heated up? Not from the fire. But the fire is being absorbed, the heat of the fire is being absorbed by the food that's already in the bottom pot. You have a cholent on the stove. So the cholent is absorbing the heat of the flame, and then it's the cholent in the pot that's heating up this panadish, this knish that you put on top now. It's getting heated up by the food in the first pot. Whereas if you put an empty pot, then it's the fire that's just traveling up through the airspace of the empty pot and heating up the food that you put on top. So the first way, as I mentioned, is a much bigger shinui. The second way, it's just a hefsek. You made a hefsek in between the flame and the food. You put an empty pot, but it's the fire. If a person would analyze what's happening here, it's the fire that's heating up his food that he put on top of it. So that's a shinui, but it's not as major a shinui. So that's only mutter. If the food is coming from the stovetop, then you're allowed to put it back onto this empty pot. Whereas if you're putting it onto a pot that's sitting on the fire already, that has food in it, you're putting it on top of a cholent, it's the cholent that's heating up your food. It's not the flame on the bottom. Because the flame on the bottom is being totally absorbed. All the heat of that flame is being absorbed by the cholent. The cholent is trapping all that heat, and then it's the cholent that's heating up your food. That's a real shinui. Using food to cook food is a more major shinui. So for that you can do even if you're taking the food out of the refrigerator.
It's even by blech, meaning if someone put an empty pot on top of a blech, same thing?
A pot on top of a blech?
An empty pot on top of a blech.
Okay, so on that, so till now we're talking about Till now we're talking about putting an empty pot on an open flame. You have an open flame, you have no blech. If you use a blech first, or if there's already a blech there, or if you put a blech down and then put even a pot, it says Rosh Hashanah Arbach and the number of other poskim, then you could even use an empty pot, even if the food's coming from the refrigerator. Okay, in other words, if you have a double, 2 steps, you have a blech plus a pot, even if it's an empty pot, then it's takamutter to put food, even from the refrigerator, fully cooked food, dry food from the refrigerator on top of that. But if there's no, you don't have a blech, and you're just utilizing a pot to be mafsik between the fire and the food you want to heat up, so then if the food you want to heat up is coming off of the stovetop now, you're allowed to put it back even onto an empty pot. Whereas if it's not coming from the stovetop, it's coming from the refrigerator or elsewhere, you can only put it on top of a pot with food in it.
I got the answer.
Okay.
When it's chazura only works by a blech. On the fire, you can't put it back, right?
Correct.
So that's why I was thinking, what's the havamana? If you could do chazura, you could do empty pot.
Right.
But you're talking about an open fire.
Right, and exactly. In other words, even with there's no blech, there's exactly.
Because with a blech, you could put it back easily.
Yeah, you just chazar take it over.
Yeah.
Correct. But here, right. Okay, now there happens to be the case of Sif Gimel. It doesn't pay for him. It's not going to help him to put it back. The whole point is it's burning, so he wants to distance it from the flame. Okay, but so the Shulchan Aruch is saying he's allowed to do it even with an empty pot. Meaning, because the case of Shulchan Aruch, he's taking a pot. He says Yochel lohaniach kedera yeshana reikanis al pi akira. I mean, he says reikanis before. You're putting an empty pot. You're taking a pot from your cabinet and putting it on the kira right now. So why are you allowed to do that? You're allowed to do that only because the food is coming from the stovetop, right? And so that's a way of getting it to be at a distance from the flame, so it won't burn as much, or it won't burn at all anymore, but it'll stay hot. Okay, so that's the. So just to repeat the halacha l'maisa. Halacha l'maisa is if you have a blech already on, or if you're able to put down a blech, as we mentioned, you're allowed to even put a blech down on Shabbos, and you want to put food onto. You want food to be raised, elevated. So you're allowed to, or then you're allowed to even take an empty pot, or not just you want it elevated. You want to heat up food. You have food in the refrigerator. You want to heat it up. You can't put it on the blech. You can't take it from the refrigerator and put it directly on the blech on Shabbos. Only chazar is mutter onto a blech, not to take from the refrigerator and put it on the blech. But you could put an empty pot on the blech, or in today's terms, you could take a disposable pan. Take a disposable pan, right? Turn it upside down, and this way you'll heat up your food. In fact. You very likely you don't want the food to be too far from the flame, right? It's not burning; it came from the refrigerator. You want to heat it up. You want to be as close to the fire as possible. So you can't put it directly in the blech, or even if you put down 2 blechs, that doesn't make a difference. That's just called kisuyim. You can't put it on a kisuy, but you could put it on a kedera. So an aluminum pan, even a cookie sheet, which has a lip to it, though not just a flat sheet, a sheet that has a lip. Even if it's not a very high lip, but it has a lip, and you turn it upside down. Put that down. So if you put that down on a blech, then you could even take food from the refrigerator and put it onto that. But if you have no blech at all, then the only way you could put food onto a pot covering an open flame would be food that's coming off of the stovetop and going back onto this.
Would a blech include a hot plate?
So we'll talk about hot plate in a minute. Hot plate's a little bit different.
So look at the mass. If somebody wants to warm up Shabbos morning the challah, he puts it or on the blech or on the crack pot bottom with a pan.
Right. So if it's on the crack pot, he doesn't need another pan because the crack pot is full of food.
No, the crack pot's what has the burner separately. Let's say the chunt is off already.
Oh, the chunt is off. Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. No, then he would have to cover it, make sure it has a blech over it.
A foil and
foil and an empty pan.
In an empty pan.
Yes. Foil and
this you could do Shabbos.
Yes. Okay. Now, so when I'm using the word blech, I just mean a sheet of metal or a foil. But if you have a hot plate, so we mentioned in the past that with regards to shehiyah and chazara, a hot plate is considered grufa ketuma. A hot plate is considered like a covered flame. And according to many poskim, we said there are machmirim, the Chazon Ish and the Rebbe Yasha, there are machmirim, but there are many mekilim, Shlomo Zalman and others are mekel, that mekel that a hot plate is considered grufa ketum already. So you could do shehiyah or chazara onto a hot plate without covering it. If you want to take something from the refrigerator and something fully cooked and dry and put it on the hot plate, so you would still need a pan though. You don't need to put down the foil. You don't need to put down a quote unquote blech, because the hot plate is considered itself grufo ketuma, which is what the blech accomplishes. But you do need an overturned pan. You would need an overturned pan. You could take an overturned pan, put it onto the hot plate, and then put the whatever it is on top.
Cookie sheet included?
Cookie sheet into it, yes. Cookie sheet, as long as it has a lip to it. It's not just a flat thing. And so it's basically it's a pan. Turn it upside down and put the dry cooked, fully cooked food onto it.
An open oven is considered like an open flame?
What do you mean open oven?
The oven works all 24 hours.
I mean it's turned on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's more complicated because putting it inside an oven that's a different style. Maybe we'll come back. I'm going to leave that for now. Putting it inside, but I'm not referring to that. I'm referring to putting on a stove top, on a hot plate, on a crock pot, whether on the pot, certainly on the pot itself, pot shell itself, or even on, like you said, on the base if you have one, the type that's basically the other type is basically just a hot plate with where you put a pot on. So that's what we're talking about. those types of.
Challah has the same halachot has to be on the top of
yes.
on the hot plate.
Yes. There is one tshuva, or a michta. It's called a michta from Shlomo Zalman in Sefer Mara Shabbos, where he originally said it would be mutter to put it directly on the blech, but then when he asked him again, there was when the mechaber asked him again in the next chelik, and he sort of retracted, and at least he retracted a very strong endorsement from allowing you to put it directly. So Lamaisa we say you should not put it directly on the blech. It should be put on top on a pan. Okay, so that's pretty much this Indian of what we call Nesina Lechatchila. The next major area is Hatmana. Now, Hatmana is a new Indian, related to all of what we're talking about, but it's a whole new area in it. Hatmana basically means insulating, right, or wrapping food. In order to keep it hot. And the Gemara says. The Gemara Masechah Shabbos and Afla Medalid says the following, according to the Girsa of Rashi and many Rishonim. It says the following: the Gemara says that it distinguishes between two forms of hatmana. There's hatmana b'davar hamosif hevel and hatmana b'davar she'eno mosif hevel. Mosif hevel means that the substance that you're insulating the food with actually makes it hotter. The substance itself has the capacity to generate heat, and if you would surround food in it, it wouldn't just maintain the temperature that the food is at, but it would actually heat it up, get it hotter. That's one concept. Hatmana b'davar mosif hevel. There's no fire. There's no real fire, but there's heat. And then there's hatmana b'davar she'ena mosif hevel, which is just insulating something with material that will just keep the heat in. It will just insulate it, like I said, but it will not generate new heat. Now, what things are considered to be mosif hevel? So there's a Mishnah. There's a Mishnah at the beginning of Parak B'Metomnin, fourth Parak in Shabbos, where the Mishnah lists various substances that are considered mosif hevel. By and large, they're not things that we use to heat up our food. They're mentioned in Shulchan Aruch and Siman Reish and Zayin Sif Gimel. Elohim Dvarim HaMosifim Hevel, Psola Shel Zaysim, the shmarim, or the byproduct of olives, O Shel Shumshman, or of sesame seeds, the zevel, manure, melach, salt, sid, chol. These are things, and some other things, straw. These are things not the types of things that we use in the modern kitchen. You won't find somebody insulating their food in any one of these things, for the most part. Then things which are considered not mosif hevel are things like a towel, or a sheet, or something, a garment, a blanket. These things are called eino mosif hevel. They insulate it. If you were to wrap your food, your pot in it, they would keep the heat in. But they would not make it hotter. It's not going to get any hotter than something. It doesn't generate heat. Right? We're not talking about an electric blanket. A regular blanket doesn't generate any heat. Neither does a towel or anything of that sort. Now, okay, so the halach. So we're getting back. The Gemara Daf Lamed Daled says that dvarim shemosifin hevel, something which does generate more heat, one is not allowed to use to insulate the food, even if you do it on Erev Shabbos, even on Friday, you're not allowed to do it and leave it that way into Shabbos. You're not allowed to take the pot off of the cooking surface and then wrap it in Sola Shel Zaysin or Zevel or any of these things, Melach, Sid. You're not allowed to wrap it or insulate it, cover it with these things and let it go into Shabbos that way. Why not? Why can't you use a Davar HaMosif Hevel even if you set it up before Shabbos? The Gemara says because if you would be allowed to, you might use remetz. What is remetz? Remetz are coals or ash that are left over from cooking. And ash, which typically or often may have some coals in there, some embers, which are still burning. And then and then you become on Shabbos to stir that. If you, just like similar to what we had by Shehiyah, the Gzer Shem Yechata B'Kacholim, you may stir the coals. Here too, if you were to use remetz, if you were to use a substance which is the ash from cooking, which has coals in it, you may stir the coals in Shabbos, which would be an isser of either mavashel, you might cook the food if it's not fully cooked, or havara, in any case, you're kindling. So in order to make sure you don't use remetz, Chazal didn't allow you to use anything which is Mosif Hevel, because that's one category. There's a category of products which cause more heat, and the one at the top on the list is remetz. Oh, and remetz is problematic because remetz you might come to mechat b'kcholim. So mainly you're not even allowed to use these other things, even though these other things it's not shaykh to be mechat. These other things don't have gecholim. They don't have coals. Solas v'zeisim or shimshimim. There are no coals. There's nothing to stir. It just naturally generates heat. But since it's in the same, Chazal put it in the same category with remetz, and they said you can't use anything that's in that category of Mosif Hevel. Okay, and that's, as I said, even if you set it up before Shabbos. But if a davar she'eino Mosif Hevel, something which does not generate heat, it just maintains the heat. So there, the halach is you're allowed to do it before Shabbos. You are allowed to set it up before Shabbos and wrap it in that and leave it into Shabbos. You're only not allowed to do it on Shabbos itself. You can't, on Shabbos itself, you can't take the pot off the fire and say, okay, I'm not ready to serve it yet, but I'm afraid it'll dry out too much if I leave it on the fire or whatever other reason, and I want to take it off the fire and now wrap it in a towel or wrap it in a blanket. That you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. To insulate it on Shabbos is usher, even with a davar she'eino Mosif Hevel. But to do it before Shabbos, if you cooked your soup and you got it nice and hot before Shabbos, and then you want to turn off the stovetop, you don't want to leave the stovetop on Shabbos, and you just want to take the pot before Shabbos and wrap it in a towel, completely wrap it in a towel or a blanket so that it will keep the heat in, that you're allowed to do. That's a davar she'eino Mosif Hevel. You're allowed to do that before Shabbos. And not only are you allowed to do it before Shabbos, meaning before Shkia, but you're even allowed to do it bein hashmashos. That's a Mishnah. We say it in Mem Adlikin every week. That Safik Hashecha, Safik Ein Hashecha, meaning Safik, at least if you daven the Nizach Ashkenaz, you say it every week. Safik Hashecha, Safik if it's dark or not, if it's night or not, which is basically what we call bein hashmashos. So there are certain things you're not allowed to do, but certain things you are allowed to do. Aval ma'arvin, you're allowed to make an erevin. V'tomnin esachamin. So take a look in the Mishnah and take a look when you sit in your Ashkenaz Siddur next time. Tomnin esachamin, you're allowed to do hatmana on chamin. You're allowed to do hatmana on hot food, but only b'davar she'eino Mosif Hevel. Only with a davar she'eino Mosif Hevel. So why can't you do it with a davar Mosif Hevel? No, that we answered. I'm sorry. Why? What I meant to ask is why is it only mutter erev Shabbos or bein hashmashos? Why isn't it mutter on Shabbos itself? So that the Gemara says gzeira shemei yarsiach. What does shemei say mean? You may heat it up, meaning to say you may go to wrap your pot. Say I want to cut Shabbos now. I want to insulate the pot to make sure it stays hot, and I find that it's like too late. It's already pretty cool. It lost its heat. I'm gonna wrap it now. It's like the lacking the barn door after the cow got out. It's too late. I'm wasting my time. So you may forget yourself and go ahead and reheat it first on Shabbos. You may reheat it in order to be able to insulate it. So in order to make sure you don't do that, so Chazal said you're not allowed to insulate on Shabbos, even with something which is not Musaf Hevel. But before Shabbos, you're allowed. Ben Hashmashas, they weren't worried about that because Ben Hashmashas, the pots are usually still are hot. But on Shabbos already, it may have cooled off. Okay, so now, by the way, I should mention this. Although it's first Mishnah that you're allowed to be matmin ben hashmashos and a davar she'eino mosef hevel, but that's may only be if you were not makabel Shabbos yet. If you were makabel Shabbos explicitly, then so if you're makabel Shabbos with the tzibur, if you answered the baruch already, even if it's still ben hashmashos, then for sure you can't do it. If you were just makabel Shabbos privately, or let's say the housewife and she lit candles, then it's a shayla. Ramesh and Shuva writes even if she lit candles, she can't do it anymore. See, he says the idea of being matmin ben hashmashos is not so practical, la'alacha, because women like candles ben hashmashos, and the lady's the one at home who's going to want to do the hatmana probably. Hopefully the husband's in shul already, and she already lit candles, so it's not really so practical to do it ben hashmashos. But theoretically, if the man was home and he wasn't the Kabbalah Shabbos, and if it's before Kabbalah Shabbos and the tzibur, there's theoretically a time. So we'll leave that as theoretical. The Ben Hashmash is part of it, but Erev Shabbos is very practical, and many people do this. You'll take the pot off the fire before Shabbos and wrap it, but not on Shabbos itself. Okay, so now, one major discussion here is, when we say you're not allowed to do hatmana on Shabbos itself, even with davar she'eino mosef hevel, does that mean you can't wrap it at all, or does that mean you just can't wrap it entirely? Maybe could I partially wrap it without wrapping the whole pot? Is that also called hatmana? Partial wrapping is that hatmana, or is it not? So this is a machlokes between the Mechaber and the Rama. In Shulchan Aruch, actually in Siman Reish Nun Gimel, even though the main halachas of Atmana are Reish Nun Zayin and Reish Nun Ches, and then there's additional halachas in Reish Nun Tes, but this Nakuda already comes up in Reish Nun Gimel. Reish Nun Gimel is the Siman that's all about Shia and Chazar. In Reish Nun Gimel, we already are introduced to the idea of Hatmana, and over there, the Mechaber holds that Hatmana is Asur, even Hatmana b'miksas. Because the Mechaber is says there that if you leave a pot in the coals, that even the bottom of the pot just is in coals, then there's a problem with Hatmana. In other words, in the discussion of Shehiyah, back in Reish Nun Gimel, in the discussion of at what stage does the food have to be in order to leave it over a source of heat on Shabbos, the Mechaber says, but by the way, when I say leaving it over a source of heat, I don't mean you can leave it sitting directly on the coals, because that's hatmana, and that you can't do anyway. What I mean is, if you elevate it, you take a pitput, like a tripod or some sort of device that some sort of stand that the pot can stand on, that the stand could be sitting in the coals, but it goes above the coals, and the pot's sitting on that, so it's not touching the coals. But if the pot's touching the coals, says the Mechaber, that's considered hatmana, even though it's mixas.
One calls it a fire. It's not like just keep food in the fire itself.
Not exactly. They may be some of them may be burning, but what do you mean anyway? So what are you asking?
Well, that's different. Over there, one can actually come to stoke the coals, but anything else really it's not doing stoking. The whole zero was like someone might come to stoke the coals, but over here it's.
But these are mamish coals.
Right. So I understand, but anything else though, why would we?
Well, we said already that anything that's mosif hevel, first of all, is in the anything mosif hevel, it has the same din as gecholim, or remetz like gecholim, and you're not allowed to be matn with it even before Shabbos, right? To leave it into
That's
Shabbos.
what he's asking. He's asking how we allow him to leave it there, even when it's on a tripod. It's mosif hevel. These coals.
No,
That's
okay.
what he's asking.
Is that what you're asking? Don't catch your father. So okay, that's what you're asking. Your father said so. That's right. Well, answer your father's question anyway. No, but the answer is it's not hatmana if it's not touching them.
Yeah.
If it's
but I thought that's what he was asking.
Okay.
To me, it seems like someone was leaving a pot on the fire. What I've done is there is just leaving a pot on the fire.
No, because if you're leaving it in coals, that is called hatmana. Everyone agrees if you were completely covered with the coals, it would be hatmana. Right? If you completely cover the coals, or we'll see even partially with coals, partially with other stuff would be hatmana. But what the Mechab is saying, even though it's only partially covered, that's called Hatmana. That's called Hatmana because it's in coals. It's not in fire, it's in coals. Okay. So the Mechab says that's called Hatmana, and the Ramah comes along and disagrees and says, no, that's not usher. It's no problem with it touching the coals, because it's only it's only partial. It's only partially insulated. The Ramah says this in Rishon Gimel. V'yesh omrim dafilu makadera omedas al gabi ha'eish mamish. He uses the eish mamish. Kol zman shi megula lamala. As long as it's uncovered on the top, lo mikri atmana. It's not called a v'shari. It's v'chein minute. He just says that the thing is that the minig is at the same time to move it off a little bit, because you don't want to, on Shabbos, you don't want to have to pick it up and then the coals all like cave in and move, and then, oh, look what you just did on Shabbos. You made a change in the fire by lifting up the pot and causing an avalanche of the coals. So the Ramah says you do want to move it in such a way that the coals won't move, but there's no problem be'etzem with it touching the coals. So in other words, the Ramah shita is hatmana b'mixas is mutter. As long as it's, as the Lashon, the Ramah is Megula Lamala, and the Mishnah Berurah repeats this in a couple of places in Rishon and Gimel. One place is Sifkata Mem Tes. The Mishnah Berurah says, Mem Ches, where it says Shehi Megula, on the Kozman Shehi Megula Lamala, it says the Mishnah Berurah, Hainu She'ein Mechasa Aleha B'Bgadim Milamala. You don't cover it, you don't put any begadim on top of it, because we'll get to this, but if you put begadim on it, if there's coals on the bottom and begadim on top, that's a problem. Even though we said begadim is be'etzim not a problem before Shabbos, we're doing it before Shabbos here, but if there's coals on the bottom and the rest is covered with begadim, then that would be a problem. But it says the Mishnah Berurah, so make sure there aren't. Make sure there's no begadim on top, and it's fine. Where he says again, just let me read you Sifkat Samach Tes in Rishon Gimel, where the Mishnah Berurah says, over there it said, one second. V'imhotzi ma'achal min hatanur b'Shabbos. This is perfect line for what we're learning. V'imhotzi ma'achal min hatanur b'Shabbos. If you took food out of the oven on Shabbos, asur lahanicho b'karim u'b'ksasos. You can't put it into cushions, pillows, covers, whatever it is. You can't do that on Shabbos. Why? Hatmana, right? That's what we're learning. You're not allowed to insulate on Shabbos. So you take the food out of the tanur, and you're not ready to serve it yet, but you want to stay out. You cannot put it into, this is the Ramah speaking, you cannot put it into covers and cushions. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Zemikri Tchilas Hatmana, the Ein Tomen B'Shabbos Hafilu B'Dav Shem Hasevel, etc., etc., etc. V'im Eino Tomen Heitei V'Socham, but if it's not well Tomen, Shehu Pasuach Melamala, it's open on the top, Sharei, it's mutter. If it's not covered over the top, if the top is open, it's not called hatmana. So that's the sheet of the Ramah. That's what the Mishnah Berurah goes with, as we say here in other places, and that is the standard minhag Ashkenaz. Although the Chazon Ish was chaylik here, and the Chazon Ish held there's no basis for this kula. But as we see, the Mishnah Berurah clearly goes along with it, and that is the standard, practice of Bnei Ashkenaz, that as long as it's only hatmana b'mixas, it's not a problem. That's not called hatmana. So you could take your pot out of the tanur or off the stovetop on Shabbos and partially cover it, just not completely. Before Shabbos, if you're using a davar she'eino mosif hevel, before Shabbos you're using just blankets, just towels, you're not using any coals, then you can completely cover it, because and that the Machaber would agree to, because it's davar she'eino mosif hevel, you're allowed to cover it completely before Shabbos. But on Shabbos itself, according to the Ramah, you're allowed to partially cover it. So how much has to be left open? So it could be really covered at the bottom, covered at the top, as long as there's a noticeable area around the circumference. Goes a ring around the pot, not just something minuscule, but clearly there's no exact shear given, but an amount that's the right to rechenrich. It's a real amount. It's a noticeable amount. You look at this pot and you clearly see it is not completely covered. There's a an area around it around the circumference that's not covered, that would be mutter. According to the Rad, that would be mutter. That's called hadmana b'miksas, and it's not problematic. Now, okay. Now, the point to clarify is this point with the gecholim and the begadim together. I said before, the things that are most of hevel, the list of things in the Mishnah there, which are brought down in the Shulchan Aruch Reish Zayin Sif Gimel, are not very popular methods of hadmana today. Right? We don't use zevel or sid or melech, etc., for the most part. But there is a form of hadmana b'davar hamosif hevel which we might do today, and that is if you have some heat source at the bottom, something which is producing heat, a real heat source like a real flame or an electric, an electric heating element, and then the pot is covered. So that is a form of hatmana b'davar hamosif hevel, right? That is a form. It's not the the initial form or whatever it is of hatmana hevel, but la halacha that is also called hatmana b'davar hamosif hevel, and therefore also not permissible even from before Shabbos. So again, you're not allowed to leave a pot that's completely insulated, even if it's just insulated with a towel or something like that, and leave it in a place where it is exposed to a source of heat that's heating up. You're leaving, besides fire concerns, but you make sure you would have to be very careful, making sure there's no fire hazard. But even if you did something in a way that it was completely safe, but if there's a source of heat and then the pot is completely covered, that's called hatmana b'davar hamosif hevel, and you're not allowed to do that. So, for example, I think this would be a perfect example. Let's say you have a crock pot. Now, a crock pot is, let's say, the standard type of crock pot, not the kind where you have a metal frame, which is a cylinder, a metal cylinder, with 3 sides, a bottom, and 2 and then it's like an oval shape, or whatever it is, a round or oval. And there are coils inside the walls, not visible, but there are coils there. And then you put inside that, you put the pot, the cheres, the earthenware pot goes inside, and the pot has a cover on it. So that is a form of hatmana b'miksas. That is partial hatmana, right? Because the walls of the metal thing is keeping it hot. So to take a towel or something of that sort before Shabbos and then cover the top of the crock pot would be usher to do, and leave that into Shabbos would be usher to do. If you wanted your cholent to be really hot, so maybe you left it on low. You didn't want to leave it on a high setting on the crock pot so it shouldn't burn. So you left it on low or keep warm, but you want to keep the heat in, better than the cover of the pot alone will do, and you want to put a pillow or a blanket on top. So now it's completely insulated. That's usher to do. Now, the pot cover itself doesn't make it hatmana, right? In other words, you say, well, it's already covered on all sides. No, the pot itself, including the pot cover, is not hatmana. That's normal bishul. It's not called hatmana when you simply have food in a pot, even if you have a cover of the pot. So even here with the crock pot, and I will just for the record, what I'm saying now is a big nidon. There is a big nidon about crock pots that maybe they're completely asur al hatmana even without the pillow on top, and hopefully we'll get to. I'm not sure we'll get to it today, but it's a big nidon. It's definitely not pasha that it's asur. Definitely not. In fact, we're going to try to explain why it's not asur, but it's a big shayla in the poskim. It's a big shayla in the poskim. The shayla started primarily around the time, shortly before Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, that's how it was nifter. That's when the whole issue started, going back in the, where was the 80s? That's when the whole issue, not 80s, it was the mid-90s. That's when this issue came to surface. But for right now, we're definitely working with the assumption, with the mahalach, that a crock pot isn't be'etzem a problem of hatmana if you just leave it the way it is. But if you would cover it on top with something on top of the cover, of its regular cover, you put a cover on top of the cover, you put a towel or something, that's a problem of hatmana. right? It's understood, and that's Hadmana b'davar mosiv hevel, because you have the electric elements that's creating heat, and then you
have electric elements, or it's like
Kosher, that's where you throw in the aluminum ballies at the bottom to lift the pot.
Well, okay, but then if you're doing that, then you're being machmer that you don't have anything covering on the top, do you?
On top of the cover. No, it's not cover, but you have the walls.
Okay, so then that means so according to what we're saying so far, I didn't say you need any such those walls. You're jumping ahead to the machmir, which is fine. But I'm saying so far I'm presenting the position that it's only a problem of money if you put something over it. If you leave nothing over it, just the regular cover is that we haven't said yet. We haven't discussed that yet in detail. Well, of course we'll have to. Okay, what do we do? Is that 58? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, so we won't be able to do it now. Okay, so let's come back to this. Hadmana is a very important topic. It's a very and there are a number of other practical cases which are at least the shalas of Hadmana that we have to address. And Bez Hashem, we will address the crackbite issue as well. Hopefully next week, Bez Hashem.
Thank you.
Okay, very welcome. Thank you all for
showing.
Couldn't Chavis let the what? Half Hadmana? No. Chaber holds Hadmana b'mixas, half Hadmana is also. What do you mean even on Shabbos?
I'm saying before Shabbos.
Even before Shabbos, okay, right. But Davar she'eino mosiv hevel.
Right.
But that's so then that's not us altogether. Then even if you do complete it, if Chaber agrees to that.
I'm saying Shabbos.
I mean, if you did it before Shabbos and left it on Shabbos?
On Shabbos.
No, on Shabbos you can have it. No, it's not fine. You can't do it on Shabbos.
Even if the davar that should,
Most of it, yeah.
You can't.
According to anyone, you can't do Hadmana on Shabbos, except, but according to the Ramah, it's not called Hadmana unless you cover it completely.
Right, so
according to the Machaber, even if you cover it partially, that's called Hadmana, and you can't do it. You cannot do it. Even though Shnei Maseh. Okay, Doug, I'm going to sign off.
Should we stop it?
Okay, take it.